Hey guys, it's Mr. Wepker here. We are back at our PowerPoint checks after taking a week off for our midterm. I hope you guys did great on the midterm. We are moving into my favorite part of world history, um, known as the Cold War. I love it. It's about Russia and America and how we hate each other, but we also can't live without each other type thing. It's like those middle school crushes that you really like, but you're gonna make fun of them because um, that's the only thing you know how to do. So our EQ for the week is how did the end of World War II lead to the Cold War? Remember, as always, to highlight your answers to your PowerPoint check in your Cornell notes. I do want to see Cornell notes. Some of you guys have been doing weird notes that I don't teach in my class, and I don't know where we got them from. So Cornell notes this week. I hope you have fun. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. So at the end of World War II, the three largest countries on the alliance, which would be the United States, the United Kingdom, or England as we call them sometimes, and the USSR, or the Soviet Union, uh, met in a place called Yalta, which is a beach town in Russia. This was during the winter time, though, so no swimming today or during this time. So basically, what they discuss is they know they're going to win World War II, and so now they want to know what to do with um, Germany after World War II. And so there was a lot of tension during this because the United States and Great Britain wanted to give Europe its land back that the two countries had invaded in order to beat Germany. But if you remember, the only reason Soviet Union got into World War II in the beginning was because they wanted to take over Europe with Hitler. They had an agreement with Hitler, and so the Soviet Union, even though they agreed to give land back to people, they do not want to do so. So they agreed to split Germany up into like sections where each country would take a part of the section, um, and they would raise it up. They'd give it money. They'd build it up again, and then they'd let Germany be its own country. But Russia didn't really want to do this. They really wanted to take over their part of Germany, and they actually will end up doing so, which will cause tension in Europe. So this is really a map of Germany after World War II, and the goal was to divide up Germany into these four sections, where each country, France, England, the Soviet Union, and the United States, would take over a part of Germany, rebuild it, and then give it back to the German people. In the middle of the red, you will notice a city with all four colors in it. That's Berlin. Basically, the Allies decided that they were all going to have a stake in Berlin, but this would lead to issues when the Soviet Union actually takes over all of their territory, and they refuse to let the Americans or the British or the French enter or exit Berlin, which would cause um, strife in the years to come. A second goal of the Yalta Conference was to create a place where people would not have to go to war anymore. The idea was that if we could get all countries to work together and to meet and discuss issues, um, then we would have peace in the world. The idea was that they'd create a organization called the United Nations, where basically countries could talk out their issues and vote on things as a whole instead of taking land and taking money uh, in the name of your own country. So every country would have a vote in the United Nations, to vote up or down an idea, but there was a thing called the Security Council. What the Security Council was anytime the United Nations agreed to something, if any country on the Security Council did not like that plan, then they could do something called a veto. And what a veto is when people pass a law and then somebody says, no, that's not a law, I'm going to veto it, or I'm going to say no to it. So 6 countries, I believe, had um, the power to veto in the United Nations, which would lead um, to a place where no laws could really be made because the United States and Russia didn't like each other, and so whenever one side passed a law, the other side would veto it, and so really the United Nations would have trouble during the Cold War. But this idea or this concept of the United Nations was created during the Yalta Conference. So when the war ended, the plan was that Stalin would take the troops that he used to invade countries towards Europe or towards Germany, and that he'd take them out of those countries and let those countries rebuild and become democracies. That's what he said he would do in the Yalta Conference, but he never did so. Really, what he did was he ignored the UN and the Yalta Conference and basically took a bunch of countries that he had taken over during World War II and turned them into communist countries. The idea was that these countries would be a divide between him and the democratic nations in Europe that supported the United States, like France and England. And so what he did is he used those countries to provide protection for himself, and he shut them down so you could not enter or exit. This led to them being called the Iron Curtain, which was basically the countries across Eastern Europe that fell to the Soviet Union and to communism just after World War II. This would create a divide between East and West Germany. So, for example, if you lived in Western Germany or Western Europe, even, and your family lived in Eastern Germany or Eastern Europe as a whole, you would not see them until the end of the Cold War. So basically, during the Cold War, these sides were strongly divided by communism, and nobody could cross over between the communist part of Europe and the democratic capitalist part of Europe. So on this map, we see the divide between capitalist or democratic Europe and communist Europe. The red is communist countries. Green is a country that had not converted to full communism, but was embracing the ideas of socialism and of the Soviet Union. The blue were all countries that had embraced democratic ideas. And the black line is a line in which the government of the Soviet Union was able to stop people from entering or exiting this area. So, for example, if your family lived in the red zone, you would not see them until after the Cold War, unless they escaped um, communist Russia, because they were not allowed to enter or exit the territory. Communism was to be strongly protected by the government of the Soviet Union. The word Iron Curtain comes from a quote by Winston Churchill, where basically he explained the fact that Russia was dividing Europe into two sides, into the communist side and then into anybody who didn't agree with them. And so he said that they're creating iron curtain, iron curtain that would divide East and West, and that this would cause destruction, and that all Moscow or the leaders of Russia cared about was total control of their society. And so this Iron Curtain led to a big problem for the United States. Their fear was that Soviet Russia or communism was like a bear, and that a bear will attack until something destroys it. And so they were afraid that if they did not stop the Soviet Union, communism would spread throughout the world, and that one day it would lead to the United States. So their fear was, how do we stop communism now so that it does not spread to our country or to any other country? So in order to stop communism, President Truman, who is in charge of the United States at the time, has this idea called containment, or to contain communism. His idea is that if we can stop the spread of communism, that Russia will die out, and therefore we won't have to fight them. Because he knew that if we had to fight Russia, it would be a nuclear war, and we did not want the devastation of a nuclear war throughout the world. And so what Truman says is that if we give money to people who do not support Russia and we rebuild them, then they will become like us, or they will like us enough to not want to be communists. So what Truman did is he created something called the Truman Doctrine, where we offer money to countries who are fighting communist control. This would be over $400 million that the United States spent, and basically our goal is to stop the spread of communism in places like Greece and Turkey, and therefore hopefully let communism die out. Like the Truman Doctrine, the United States also had a plan called the Marshall Plan, which basically said that we will give aid or give money to rebuild Europe, and we send this money to people who will not fall to communism. So if you agree to not fall to communism, we will give you money to rebuild. Most of this money goes to our allies, though. So many people argue that it didn't really help Europe as a whole. But the idea was that if we can rebuild countries, they will have a stable government and therefore will not fall to communism or lead to another world war like we saw after World War One, where countries were broke and that led to the rise of Nazism and fascism in Europe. So the idea was that if we take these boxes of food and supplies and money and rebuilding and we say, hey, America is doing this, then people will like us and want to be like us. As this shows, most of the money in the Marshall Plan went to countries that helped us fight um, in World War II. So UK and France got the majority of the spending from the Marshall Plan, but we also rebuilt places like Italy, West Germany, Austria, which were places that were not necessarily allies of the United States. The goal was that if we can fund these places, if we can give them enough money and let them rebuild, they will not fall to the evils of communism. So because Russia decides to spread communism after World War II, and the United States decides to stand against this spread of communism, the two countries begin to hate each other. This leads to them spying on each other and also creating fear in their own nations. Basically, both countries continually were afraid that the other country would take over them. Sorry, that was weird that the light changed. The lights went off in classroom, but hey, we fixed it. Um, so both countries were deathly afraid that the other would take over them. And so their people or the people in their countries began um, to have these thoughts that they were always under attack. If you look at the picture above me, you can see this was a comic book in the United States which said that if you do not support America, one day the communists are going to come and burn your flag and kill you. This we laugh now, but this was an actual fear at the time, and so both countries began to use spies and propaganda to attack the other and to keep the other afraid of them. This did not stop until 1991. So this was like 50 years, almost 50 years of Cold War until the Soviet Union fell. In order to make sure that no one side was stronger than the other, both sides created alliances, which basically said that if one person in our alliance was attacked, we will attack back. So for the Americans, we had a thing called NATO, or the North Atlantic Trade Organization, which were basically European nations, US and Canada, who all agreed that if one was attacked, they would all attack, including nuclear war. In order to fight against this, the Soviets created something called the Warsaw Pact, which was basically an agreement of communist countries that said that if we were attacked, we would all fight together. So really, it was the communist countries of Europe and Russia against the democratic or capitalist countries of the United States, North America, and Europe. So last thoughts for this section is that both countries begin to be so afraid of each other that they feel that they need to build the biggest weapon stockpile in the world. So both sides continue to build more and more nuclear weapons in preparation that one side will attack. So neither side wants to attack first, but their fear is that somebody will attack them and they will not be prepared. So when Russia sees the United States building nuclear weapons, they say, okay, we need to build them because what if they have more than we do? So Russia begins to build more. And then the United States sees Russia building more and says, oh, now we have to build more. So this cycle continues back and forth. Um, and both countries continue to build more and more weapons because they're afraid uh, that they will not have uh, the weapons they need if they are attacked. So they're not afraid of nuclear war, but they're afraid of being attacked first. So they build more and more weapons. This leads to advancements in science because they're building these nuclear weapons, and it will lead to something called the space race, which we will learn about later. You guys have a great week. Remember to highlight your answers in your notes. Highlight your answers in your notes. I appreciate you guys. I am not going to be here this week because I had the Avid trip on Friday. So you will see me on this Friday. So when you guys come back on Friday, you will see me. I hope you guys have a great week. If you have any questions, feel free to feel free to email, get a hold of me in any way possible. I wish you guys the best and have a great week.